What's up everybody, Chris Pinnell here and welcome to the video. We're talking start sits for each position for week 7 of the fantasy football season. If you do end up enjoying today's video, or even if you don't, make sure you have a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. And I know nobody wants to subscribe to the brand new channel, but I'm not a complete noob at this. I do have another channel that I've been posting on for years for DFS content for DraftKings and FanDuel. But I started this as a side project and I've not told anybody about it, so doing it for fun right now. So not a complete noob out here. I have some experience. And I have worked for some companies I'm sure you have heard about and probably watched videos from. Though, so if you have any questions about your own start set decisions, leave them down below. I'm more than happy to answer them. All right, so let's get right into it here. And we're gonna be doing 2 starts, 2 sits at each position. So hopefully I won't take up too much of your time. But we're gonna go Geno Smith as my number 1 start at the quarterback position this week. He is currently coming in at QB 23 over on Sleeper. Keep in mind he did have a bye week, so it's gonna look a little bit worse than his point per game average. But so far this season, Geno Smith hasn't exactly been amazing. I think that's putting it lightly. He's had one good game, and that was versus the Detroit Lions. But besides that, 9 points, 16, 9, 16. He's had a couple of weeks where he's not going to kill you, but 2 out of 5 weeks so far, being in the single digits, is probably not what you expected when you drafted Geno Smith this year after he had an extravagant season last year. Not what you would have expected from Geno Smith. But this is a great bounce back spot versus the Arizona Cardinals. Their defense is just not something we should be concerned about all season long. They currently rank 28th versus the position, which means they're allowing the 5th most points per game at 21.5, 266 passing yards, 1.5 passing touchdowns. The downside with Geno this year is he's just not really getting you into the end zone too often, only 1 passing touchdown per game and throwing the ball less than 30 times per game. And my one concern would be is that Kenneth Walker is also in an absolute smash spot. And while he won't be in this video because he's an obvious start, I still think this entire Seattle offense is going to be in play. And Vegas prop over for Geno Smith this week is at 250 passing yards. That's a little bit above his per season average at 234. So Vegas is giving him a nice little bump there as well with the plus matchup, and that's what I'm doing as well. So if he can get us 2 touchdowns and 250 yards, I think that is perfectly viable as a low-end QB1 this week. Our second quarterback start of the week, for me, it's going to be Brock Purdy, coming off a pretty poor game versus the Cleveland Browns, but that is one of the absolute best defenses in football. And look, I'm a Browns fan. You probably see the helmet in the background, but I'm not being biased. Like historically so far through the first few weeks of the season, their defense has been incredible versus the run, versus the pass, versus quarterbacks, versus whatever. They've been good, plus the weather was shaky and they were on the road. So we'll give Brock Purdy a pass. It was his first ever regular season loss as a starting quarterback for the 49ers. Probably going to get back on track here on the road in Minnesota. We're playing in the Dome, so you don't have to worry about any weather concerns here. Christian McCaffrey is banged up, so if he does happen to miss, maybe they just run the ball less, although I don't think this offense will miss a beat with or without Christian McCaffrey here. They have a 25.25 implied team total. They come in as 6.5 point favorites, and this happens to be a pretty good matchup versus this past defense. Ever since last year, I mean, the Vikings defense is someone we can stream. The quarterback option, wide receivers, really anybody. I guess we know they don't offer too much resistance. They're allowing close to 20 fantasy points per game. They currently rank 21st versus the position. Not giving up too much yardage-wise, but this is definitely a very beatable defense. And Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, if everyone's at full health, not even counting CMC. But if CMC plays, that doesn't hurt Brock Purdy. It's just more dump offs for him because we know CMC can turn a cheap little dump off into a touchdown. We saw that versus the Cleveland Browns last week where he just did a little shovel pass and then he took it like 20 yards right into the end zone. So Brock Purdy, while he's not the most prolific, electric quarterback, he doesn't make too many mistakes and he can just kind of walk his way into 250 and 2, which is kind of what I'm looking for from a streaming option at quarterback to start this week. And moving on to our sits of the week at the quarterback position, we're going to start it off with Jared Goff. And Jared Goff's actually been pretty good this year. Now, he's not yet had a bye week, but he's still coming in at QB5 on the season. He's averaging 270 yards, just under 2 passing touchdowns, not really making too many mistakes out there. And then here's 70% completion percentage. But he runs into a buzzsaw matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens on the road, and kind of like the Minnesota Vikings with Kirk Cousins, I prefer them playing at home. He just plays better football. And the same can be said for the Detroit Lions offense with Jared Goff in Ford Field. And the Ravens right now are actually allowing the fewest points per game to the quarterback position, only allowing 10.7 points per game, less than passing touchdown, less than 200 passing yards, and not giving up too much on the ground either, which is not really something we're concerned about with Jared Goff either. But so far, through 6 weeks, this is the absolute worst matchup you can ask for. Less than a 20-point implied team total on the road here. They come in at 3-point dogs. They're not going to really have the running game to rely on with David Montgomery being out. Not saying Jahmyr Gibbs can't do a good job, but with Montgomery, he can take a lot of weight off of Goff's shoulders if they give him 20-plus carries, set up play action, and things like that. So we'll be missing that this week. Craig Reynolds is also banged up, so hopefully Jahmyr Gibbs is good to go. They're not going to have a backfield this weekend, but Jared Goff is a pretty easy pass for me this week. And even if he does happen to do well, I am fine missing out on that because I'm just not projecting him for a good QB1 type of week. And the next guy I'm going to be out on, we just mentioned him briefly, but he is playing at home. That's not the reason. But it's Kirk Cousins versus the 49ers defense. And this is just not really a defense you want to start many players against. They're currently allowing the 4th fewest points per game to the quarterback position. Cousins has been great this year. Keep in mind, though, the large majority of that has been with the best wide receiver in football, Justin Jefferson, who makes your life a lot easier. He's averaging 280 passing yards per game, 2.3 passing touchdowns, and no team in the league throws the ball as many times as the Minnesota Vikings. So there's always good volume. There's always good talent around him. His defense is bad, so it puts him in good fantasy game scripts to be just chucking the ball the entire game, which this should be a positive game script. They are 6.5-point dogs at home, and there's no weather to be worried about, but matchup's not good. You're without Justin Jefferson, so it just puts a lot more pressure on lesser talented guys like Jordan Addison, who I'm not saying he's bad, but he's obviously not as good as Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins. You still have Hawkinson, but I'm not expecting, with Jefferson out, the 280 yards and 2.3 passing touchdowns per game to keep up. So he's definitely going to be a sit for me this week, and hopefully Justin Jefferson can get back soon. Moving on to the running backs, my number one start here is going to be either Aaron Jones or A.J. Dillon, whoever starts for the Green Bay Packers. It looks like Jones might end up being back. I don't have a Thursday update yet because I'm recording this on Thursday morning, but Wednesday, with the hamstring issue, he did practice limited, which was nice. So if Aaron Jones returns, whoever it is in the backfield, they're going to be an auto start versus the Denver Broncos defense, who we know is just absolutely dreadful versus fantasy running backs. So far this season, they're allowing 40.7 points per game, ranking dead last, 150 rushing yards, 1.3 rushing touchdowns, and they're getting shredded through the air as well with nearly 7 catches, 53 receiving yards, and 0.67 receiving touchdowns. Now, a lot of this damage was done by the Miami Dolphins when they had like 8 touchdowns that game, so it is a bit skewed, but this is not a good run defense. And we can just start guys versus them all season long. And while we only have like a 1-game sample size from Aaron Jones because he played the first week versus Chicago, he went off 27 fantasy points, had 4 targets, 86 receiving yards, and got into the end zone. Also got into the end zone on the ground, 9 carries, 41 yards, 4.5 yards per carry, which was nice. Now we can expect that every single week. And he didn't play week 2, didn't play week 3, played in week 4 briefly. Only had 35% of the snaps, 5 carries, 18 yards, and 2 targets. So we really haven't seen much of Aaron Jones this year, but we know he's an efficient running back, and this is about as good of a matchup as you can ask for. So if he returns, I would start him with confidence. I'd have a hard time setting him because I doubt you have too many better options than Aaron Jones facing the Denver Broncos. If he happens to be out, fire up A.J. Dillon. He is not good. Efficiency-wise, he's terrible, but if he just falls into the end zone, which shouldn't be too hard to do versus the Broncos, I think he'll be fine as a flex play. And my second guy I like this week is Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. Pretty much is going to split the snaps with Antonio Gibson. He's more of a threat in the passing game. But even though that he's not the main pass-catching running back, there has been weeks where he is involved in the passing game a little bit. He does have 2 receiving touchdowns on the season, which those are hard to project. He does have 3 rushing touchdowns on the year, but 4 targets versus Chicago 2 weeks ago, 2 targets versus Atlanta, 3 targets versus Denver, 2 targets versus Arizona. So if we can get 1 to 3 targets every week and he just catches 1 or 2 of those, that's at least a little bit of a nice floor over in a PPR league. But I'm mainly concerned what he can do on the ground versus the New York Giants. This is a very favorable matchup versus that Giants defense, currently ranking 26 versus running backs, allowing over 130 rushing yards per game and 1 rushing touchdown, 25.3 points collectively versus opposing running backs. And Brian Robinson's a guy that's averaging right around 13 carries per game, 2 targets, 50 yards, close to 4 yards per carry. He hasn't been exactly efficient this year, and I hate having only a 6% target share. But this is a really good matchup for him to get going on the ground and get into the end zone as he's the main goal line back. And moving on to the sits, the number 1 for me is going to be Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And he has definitely had a bit of a disappointing season. I did expect better from him, and he's getting the opportunity. It's not like he's barely playing. He's playing a good chunk of the snaps, 79% week 1, 72%, 91%, 70%, and 79% last week versus Detroit. But he is just not doing anything with them. He has 2 games above double-digit points, and 1 was a 10.8 versus the Saints. Had a great game week 2 versus Chicago, where he had 21 fantasy points. But other than that, he just is really not getting anything going on the ground. He's averaging 3.3 yards per carry, which is abysmal. That's like on par with guys like A.J. Dillon, worse than Najee Harris. And I think we all kind of hate Najee Harris. Barely better than Ramondre Stevenson so far this year. Getting 14 carries per game, but that's less than 50 receiving yards, or rushing yards, I should say, in the receiving market. It's a decent 11% target share. Like, I would take that from a running back. And that's kind of the one thing that'll keep him afloat, getting 20 receiving yards per game and 3 catches. Like, that's the one upside there. But this is a terrible matchup versus Atlanta. Third versus running backs, allowing only 83 rushing yards per game, have not giving up a rushing touchdown yet this season. only 14.4 points per game. So I don't really like Tampa in general this week, but I'd be more interested in the passing attack, but they're all kind of pretty low in the totem pole for me this week. And we just talked about it, but Najee Harris, another guy that I will be sitting this week. If you have Jaylen Warren or Jaylen Warren's available out there, I would probably pick him up and just get rid of Najee Harris. I prefer him in this offense, especially if you are in a PPR league, because his involvement in the passing game is honestly really good. He's seeing close to 5 targets per game, over 30 receiving yards, a 16% target share. As for Najee Harris, he just doesn't get really involved in the passing game whatsoever. Only a 5% target share, less than 4 yards per carry. Gets halfway decent volume on the ground with over 12 carries per game, but only 50 rushing yards per game. And if you're looking at a sleeper profile here, I just don't really see a game where you've been excited about rostering Najee Harris. Honestly, if we took Najee Harris's name off of there, because I think he still has name value, and you just slapped Gus Edwards on there, I think it's the same exact thing. Because with Gus Edwards, you're either getting 5 or 11 points, because you're either getting your 50 rushing yards with 0 volume in the passing game, or you're getting 11 points because he had 50 yards and then he found it into the end zone. And with Najee Harris, if you're looking at his game log, 5, 5, 6, 11, didn't score in that game, just ended up having a really long catch for 32 yards, and then Baltimore 5 points. So Najee Harris is Gus Edwards in a different uniform, and I would feel very comfortable sitting him versus the Rams defense, who's honestly been pretty good versus the run this year, allowing the, I believe, 8th fewest points per game to the position, only 16.6 collectively, 85 rushing yards, and has not really allowed too many rushing touchdowns either. So Najee Harris is a pretty easy stay away for me this week, and I do expect them to be trailing as well. So another good setup for Jalen. And moving on to the wide receivers, my number 1 guy this week is Marquise Brown of the Arizona Cardinals, who finds himself in an absolute dream matchup versus Seattle Seahawks. They currently allow the most points per game to the position, ranking dead last, 49.6 points to opposing wide receivers, over 200 receiving yards, 1.4 touchdowns, which is not just through the air in general, that is specifically to wide receivers. And Marquise Brown is a guy that is going to get a lot of volume. 9 targets per game, 30% target share, 44% market share of the team's air yards, 704 air yards on the season, a 76% weighted opportunity share. Now, they are not the best targets in the world. It's not like you're getting 9 targets from Mahomes, you're getting 9 targets from Josh Dobbs. So I guess in Mahomes' world, it'd be like getting 5 to 6 targets from him. But the opportunity is there. They're 7.5 point dogs. They're on the road facing a very bad pass defense. So in a pass-heavy game script from Josh Dobbs, if we can get our 9, 11 targets here, I like it a lot. Now, again, they're not going to be the best targets. He's only catching about half of those so far this season with his 5 catches per game on 9 targets, a little bit over half, and only 55 receiving yards. But the upside is there. Should be a good game script. And I love Marquise Brown this week. And then I love the rookie from Baltimore, who's definitely establishing himself as a legit wide receiver 1 for this offense. Zay Flowers, nearly 8 targets per game, close to 6 catches, 61 receiving yards, 30% target share. Not really getting to the end zone much, which is totally understandable with the Baltimore Ravens offense, who's more run-oriented. But a 64% weighted opportunity share, 28% market share of the team's air yards. The Lions are currently bottom half in the league versus opposing wide receivers. I think Zay Flowers is firmly in that wide receiver 2 category with, honestly, high-end wide receiver 2 upside. Moving on to the sit-ems, the number 1 guy for me is going to be George Pickens, because he has been really good with Deontay Johnson out. Did have that 1 poor game versus Houston, but besides that, 29 points versus Baltimore in week 5 before the bye week, 11 versus Las Vegas, 25 versus Cleveland. That's a tough matchup. Did kind of get that on a broken play where he's wide open for a long touchdown, but Pickens has definitely been viable, especially with the volume that he's been getting, no less than 6 targets in a game this year. But with Deontay Johnson looking to be back this week, did practice in full, recovering from the hamstring issue. We know when he's on the field, he is the number 1 wide receiver in this offense, getting the bulk of the targets. If you look back to 2022 when he was healthy, just reading some of the targets from the prior weeks. So looking at week 18 and before that, 10 targets, 7, 10, 8, 11, 8. And if you look at George Pickens in a similar time frame, which, it's not like complete apples to apples comparison here, but 6, 4, 5, 5, 3, 2. So Deontay Johnson should put himself firmly back as the wide receiver 1 in this offense. I'm not saying both guys aren't talented. Pickens is definitely a good talent, but Deontay Johnson should be the guy that's getting the bulk of the work. So I would not expect similar production from what we've seen from George Pickens, like we've had so far this season. Plus, the Los Angeles Rams, when it comes to the wide receiver position, has actually been pretty good so far this year. They're allowing the 4th fewest points per game to the position, barely anything into the end zone, 131 yards and only 27.7 fantasy points. So with them both being back, while it's good for the Steelers offense, it's not good for fantasy purposes. And this one might not be a popular take, and you might have to start him anyway, but if you have the luxury to not start Michael Pittman this week, I would probably recommend doing it. This is about as tough of a matchup as you could ask for. Cleveland Browns defense has been absolutely shut down versus opposing wide receivers, and it's not like they've had an easy schedule so far. They've played some good wide receivers. They've played Brandon Ayuk. Deebo Samuel got hurt early in that game. They've played Jamar Chase. They've played Zay Flowers. So it's not like it's been an absolute cakewalk for this defense. They've had good competition, and they've done their job. George Pickens is like the only guy that's got them this year, and that was on a long broken play. They're allowing the fewest points for any of the position, 18.6 points as a whole. Not just the wide receiver ones, as a whole. 94 yards and 0.2 receiving touchdowns. And while Pittman is hyper-targeted, close to 10 targets per game, 27% target share, that's elite volume. I'm saying if you're in a deep league, yeah, start Michael Pittman. But if you are in a 10 team and a 12 team and you got a lot of wide receivers and you have the option to sit Michael Pittman, this is probably a good week to do it. And the start of the week at the tight end position, probably someone that should be an auto start most weeks, at least heading into the season or the year prior. We were all going to think that because we know the talent is extremely high draft pick and everything. But he was really on a skid to start the season. Back at 6 points, 3, 8, 4. But the past 2 weeks versus Houston and versus Washington have been excellent at the tight end position. We have seen 7 catches, 4 catches on 11 targets and 6 targets. And we know the upside with Kyle Pitts. The matchup, it's so-so. I would say it's below average versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but honestly, I don't really care about matchups too much when it comes to tight end position. It's just so noisy because the sample size is so low. It all really just depends on like what tight ends have you played so far. There's like if Travis Kelce is facing the team that is going to have the least amount of points for you in the tight end position, I don't care. Like Sam Laporta's in that situation this week, but you're starting Sam Laporta no matter what. So as for Kyle Pitts, his numbers this year, while he hasn't had like an amazing season so far, the targets and the volume is still healthy and the opportunity is there. 18.5% target share, 52% weighted opportunity share, a 36% market share of the team's air yards. I know the Falcons don't throw the ball a ton, but that's still elite level opportunity. He has the most air yards of any tight end on here, 12.4 ADOT, which is the highest of any tight end that I'm looking at that I projected for points this week. 6 targets per game, only 3.6 catches. Obviously, the targets he's getting are the absolute best. They're not the most valuable targets in the world from Desmond Ridder, but we can't get too picky, and 41 receiving yards. So I would start Kyle Pitts with confidence. And if he can string together another good week, he's probably just going to be an auto start every single week here going forward. Another tight end I would consider starting this week if you are on the fence on him. There's a lot of bye weeks this week, so you might be just needing a flyer. And if he's available on waivers, we have Zach Ertz of the Arizona Cardinals. I like him for similar reasons I talked about with Marquise Brown. Obviously not the same kind of position, talent, or really the exact same situation or anything like that. But for a tight end that's available and he gets over 6 targets per game with a 20% target share, and a 41% weighted opportunity share, and a decent market share of the team's air yards for being a tight end. Only 4 catches per game for 28 receiving yards, but always a threat to get into the end zone. Like, he's fine. It should be a pass-heavy game script with them being 7.5-point dogs. So I will take the volume because it's really all you can ask for. Like, you can be as good as you want to be, but if you're not getting opportunity, you're not going to get the chance to score points. I got him projected for just under 9 points this week, which I will take. I'll take 5 points, but if it gets 8 to 9, which is what I have him projected for, I think you'll be extremely happy with that. And I'm not going to give you a sit tight end because the position is so shallow as it is. Honestly, I think anybody, as long as they have a heartbeat, it's going to be viable. But that's all I'm going to have for today's video. If you guys have any questions about anything we talked about or your own personal questions, leave them down below. More than happy to interact and talk to one of you. But make sure you leave a like down below if you did enjoy. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. I wish you all the best of luck in all of your matchups this week in all of your leagues. And I'll see you all next time.